The sterile smell of the hospital air clung to my clothes like a reminder I couldn't shake off. The room felt cold, colder than it ever had before. I had been here for days waiting for someone to make a decision that I couldn't make for myself. I had been in pain for months, a constant ache that gnawed at me from the inside. The doctors had told me my condition wasn't life-threatening, but it was enough to make every movement feel like torture. I had already been through countless tests, seen specialists, and waited for answers, but nothing was certain. It wasn't supposed to be this complicated. I had hoped that when my dad arrived today, it would be a relief. He had been absent through most of this ordeal, caught up in his own life, his own world. But when he walked through the door that afternoon, it wasn't the comforting presence I had longed for. It was something else entirely. I sat up in the hospital bed, my body weak and my mind racing. He walked in with that same neutral expression he always wore, the one that made it hard to read him. A lifetime of silence between us had made it difficult to tell if he was concerned, or if this was just another one of those moments where he felt obligated to show up. "Hey, Dad," I whispered, my voice hoarse from the days of barely speaking. "Hey," he replied, his tone cool, detached. He stood there for a moment as if taking in the sight of me lying there. The air between us was thick, filled with unspoken things that neither of us had dared to acknowledge for years. The nurse came in shortly after with a clipboard in hand. She checked my vitals quickly, her movements efficient, professional. But I could tell by the way she glanced at me every so often that she knew something I didn't. The decision had been made, and now it was just a matter of time before everything changed. I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread building in my chest. The surgery was supposed to be routine, something to fix the problem that had been plaguing me for so long. But as I glanced at my dad's face, I realized it wasn't going to be that simple. Not with him. "Are you ready?" the nurse asked, her voice soft, almost reassuring. "I'm as ready as I'll ever be," I answered, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I looked at my dad, hoping for some sign of support, but he was unreadable, standing there like a statue. His silence felt like a wall between us. The nurse left and I was alone with him once more. The tension in the room was unbearable, suffocating. And then my dad spoke. "I'll sign off on the surgery," he said, his voice unexpectedly firm. "But only if you agree to one thing." I felt my stomach drop. What? My mind was racing, trying to piece together what he was about to say. But nothing could have prepared me for his next words. "You have to stay silent," he added, his eyes locking with mine, his gaze unwavering. "Silent?" I repeated, the word hanging in the air like a bomb waiting to go off. "Yes," he said, his tone cold, calculated. "You can't tell anyone about this. Not your mother. Not anyone." The room seemed to tilt for a moment. My head was spinning, trying to process what he was asking. It didn't make sense. Why would he ask me to keep quiet about something so important, something that could change my life forever? Why? I managed to croak, the question slipping out before I could stop myself. I was shaking now, the adrenaline coursing through my veins, my heart pounding in my chest. "Because it's for the best," he replied, his voice so devoid of emotion that it chilled me to the bone. "You have to stay silent. This is the way things are going to be." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The weight of his words crushed me, leaving me breathless. He had always been distant, always been cold, but this was something else. Something darker. I wanted to scream at him, to demand why he was doing this, why he was making me choose between my health and my silence. But I couldn't. Not with him. Not with the man who had been absent for so many years. I looked at him, my heart breaking in my chest, and the words I wanted to say caught in my throat. And then he turned and walked out, leaving me alone again with nothing but his chilling command echoing in my head. The next few hours felt like they stretched into days. The pain in my body seemed distant now, overshadowed by the sick feeling that had settled in my stomach. My dad's words replayed over and over in my mind, each repetition twisting the knife a little deeper. "Stay silent." It wasn't just the request. It was the way he said it, as if it was something I should have already known. As if my silence was the most important part of the entire procedure. I couldn't understand why. Why would he ask me to stay silent about my own health? About my own body? I was supposed to trust him. He was my father after all. But he had never been the father I needed. He had been absent for most of my life, emotionally distant, leaving me to fend for myself in the world while he focused on his career, his reputation. It wasn't until I needed him the most that he showed up, only to tell me that my surgery, my very life, came with a condition. A condition that felt more like a punishment. The room was dim now, the late afternoon light fading through the blinds, casting long shadows across the sterile floor. I stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it all. I needed the surgery. The pain was unbearable, my condition deteriorating. But the thought of staying silent about it, the thought of keeping this secret for him, was slowly eating away at me. What if something went wrong? What if I couldn't survive the surgery? What would happen to me if I followed his demand? If I stayed silent and let him control the narrative? Would my life be reduced to just another one of his rules? My mind raced, bouncing from one dark thought to the next. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than just the surgery. The silence wasn't just about my health. It felt like it was about control. His control over me, over my life. Suddenly, the door creaked open and my mom entered the room. Her expression softened when she saw me lying there, and she approached cautiously as if afraid to disturb my thoughts. She sat down on the edge of the bed, her hand reaching out to rest on mine. It was a small gesture, but I could feel the warmth of her touch, the comfort that she always provided, unlike my father. "How are you feeling?" she asked gently, her voice full of concern. "I'm fine," I lied. The truth was, I felt worse than I ever had in my life. This wasn't just physical pain. It was the weight of my father's decision. The way it hung over me like a dark cloud, suffocating me. "I'm worried about you," she continued, her eyes searching mine. "You've been through so much. You don't have to do this alone." I felt a lump form in my throat. My mother had always been the one to support me, to be there when no one else was. But my dad's words echoed in my mind, drowning out everything else. He had made it clear that this was his decision. He had signed off on the surgery, yes, but only under one condition. And now here was my mom, unaware of the weight pressing down on me. "Mom, I don't know if I can do this," I whispered, my voice shaky. "He's asking me to stay silent. About everything." Her eyes widened and she pulled her hand away from mine, sitting back as if I had slapped her. "Stay silent? What do you mean, stay silent?" "Exactly what I said," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "He told me that I can have the surgery, but only if I don't tell anyone." "Not you. Not anyone." I saw the shock in her face, and for the first time, I realized how much she had been kept in the dark. She had always been the one who had tried to be there for me, but she was as much a victim of my father's control as I was. "I don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "Why would he do that? Why would he ask you to keep something like this a secret? This isn't his decision to make alone. It's your body, your life. Not his." "I don't know," I whispered, feeling tears well up in my eyes. "But I don't think it's just about the surgery. I think it's about him controlling me again. He's always done that. And now he's using my health as leverage." I could see the sadness in my mom's eyes as she processed my words. She looked down at the floor, shaking her head slowly. "He's always been like this, hasn't he? Always thinking that he knows what's best for everyone, without ever asking us what we really want." I nodded. "And now I have to make a choice. Stay silent and let him keep controlling me, or speak up and risk losing everything, including my health." My mother stood up then, pacing back and forth across the room. "I don't know what's worse, Emma. The fact that he's trying to control you, or the fact that he's trying to keep you in the dark. He's supposed to be your father. He's supposed to protect you, not use you as a pawn in some game of his." I didn't have the energy to argue anymore. My mother was right. My father had always been like this, distant, manipulative. But now it was more than just his usual indifference. It felt like he was setting a trap and I was walking right into it. "I don't know what to do anymore," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I need this surgery, Mom. But I don't know if I can do it if it means keeping quiet about everything." My mom walked over to me and sat beside the bed again, her hand gently brushing my hair out of my face. "You don't have to stay silent, Emma. Not for anyone. This is your life. And if he's not willing to see that, then it's his problem, not yours." But even as she said the words, I knew it wouldn't be that simple. My father had a way of making things feel like they were out of my hands, out of my control. And now, with my surgery on the line, I had no idea where this road would take me. The days that followed felt like I was walking through a fog, each step harder than the last. The surgery was looming, and the weight of my father's condition pressed down on me with each passing minute. My thoughts were a constant swirl of confusion, anger, and fear. It wasn't just about the surgery anymore. It was about everything he had done to me, to us, all these years. I couldn't stop thinking about what my mother had said. "You don't have to stay silent, Emma." But the truth was, I didn't know if I could go through with the surgery without staying silent. It was the one thing my father had given me in exchange for my compliance. The one thing he had always held over me. And now here I was, faced with an impossible decision. My health or my silence. I spent hours lying in that hospital bed, my mind racing. I had always been the one to keep my feelings hidden, to keep everything inside. But now, it was eating away at me, slowly unraveling the threads of my sanity. It was like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into the abyss, and I wasn't sure which way to jump. I hated the way my father had manipulated me, controlled me. It wasn't just the surgery, it was everything. Every little thing he had ever done, from the way he dismissed my dreams to the way he made me feel invisible in the family, was all leading up to this. His way of keeping me small, keeping me silent, keeping me under his thumb. I had never felt so powerless. That evening, my mother came to visit again. She sat by my bedside, her eyes filled with concern. But this time there was something else, something deeper in her gaze. I could see the fear in her eyes, the fear of losing me. But I wasn't just worried about the surgery anymore. I was worried about the cost of staying silent, about what it would do to me, to my soul. I could feel myself breaking piece by piece. "Emma," she said quietly, breaking the silence, "I know you're struggling with this decision. But you don't have to face this alone. We'll figure it out together. Your dad, he doesn't get to control everything." Her words should have been comforting, but they only made me feel more trapped. She was right in some ways. My father didn't get to control everything. But the reality was, he had always controlled me. And now he was doing it again. "I don't know if I can do this, Mom," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I don't know if I can stay silent. I need to speak out. I need to tell someone. I need to have my voice back." She squeezed my hand, her grip tight as if trying to hold me together. "I know, sweetheart. I know you do. But you're not in this alone. I'm here and I'll fight with you. Whatever happens, we'll get through it." Her reassurance didn't help. It was like a bandage on a wound that needed stitches. I needed more than her words. I needed to take control of my life. I needed to stop letting my father dictate my every move. But how could I do that when he held the key to my surgery, to my survival? I lay back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling, the tension in my body unbearable. It felt like I was suffocating, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I had to make a choice. And then, it hit me, the realization that I wasn't just fighting for my health anymore. I was fighting for my independence. I was fighting for my voice. I wasn't just going to let him win. I wasn't going to let him silence me again. I had to speak out. I had to take back control, even if it meant risking everything. The next morning I made up my mind. I wasn't going to stay silent. Not anymore. The surgery was important, yes, but my dignity, my ability to make choices for myself, that was more important. I called the nurse in, my voice firm despite the tremor of fear in my chest. "I need to speak with the doctor," I said. "It's about the surgery." The nurse hesitated, clearly confused, but she nodded and left to fetch the doctor. I could feel the weight of the moment building, like the air had thickened around me. I was about to make a stand, to take control, to speak up. And when the doctor arrived, I didn't hesitate. "I want to make it clear that I'm not agreeing to the surgery under my father's terms," I said, my voice steady. "I'll go through with the procedure, but I need to speak for myself. No one tells me to stay silent, not anymore." The doctor's eyebrows furrowed, clearly surprised by my sudden change of heart. But I wasn't backing down. "I'll have to speak with your father," the doctor said, his tone neutral. I nodded. "You do that. But I'm not being silenced." The doctor left the room and I could feel the fear rising inside me. What would my father say? Would he try to stop me? Would he threaten me again? I didn't know. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Not like I had been before. I had to stand up for myself, even if it meant standing alone. An hour later, my father walked into the room. He didn't say anything at first, just stood in the doorway, his gaze cold and unreadable. He was still the same man, distant, calculating, expecting me to bend to his will. But I wasn't that person anymore. "I heard you've decided to go against my wishes," he said, his voice low. "I think you should reconsider." I looked him in the eyes, my resolve firm. "I'm not staying silent anymore, Dad. I'm not going to live in the shadows of your control. This is my life." His eyes hardened, but he didn't say anything. He just stood there, staring at me like I had betrayed him. Like I had ruined his plans. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care. "I'm done," I said quietly but with strength. "Do what you want. But I'm speaking for myself now." He said nothing more. The silence between us stretched, but it didn't feel suffocating anymore. It felt freeing. The hours that followed felt like a blur, each moment weighed down by the uncertainty of what was to come. I had made my decision. I wasn't going to be silenced. But the reality of facing my father, of challenging him head-on, was a different story. When the doctor left, I was left alone with my thoughts. My heart raced as I thought about what was happening, the tension rising in my chest. For the first time in a long while, I felt the power of my own voice. It felt like a rebellion, a small act of defiance, but it was enough to make me feel alive again. The door opened and in walked my father. His presence filled the room, the same cold and controlled man who had ruled my life for as long as I could remember. He didn't sit, instead he stood by the door, his arms crossed, his eyes studying me with that familiar, unyielding gaze. "So this is what it's come to?" he asked, his voice flat as if he wasn't entirely surprised. "You're going to make a scene over something as simple as surgery?" I didn't respond right away. Instead, I studied him, trying to find the words that would make him understand. But I knew deep down that there was no understanding him. No reasoning with him. He had never seen me as a person with agency, with the right to make my own choices. To him, I was always just a piece of his world, to be molded, shaped, and controlled. "I'm not making a scene, Dad," I finally said, my voice calm but firm. "I'm standing up for myself. For the first time in my life, I'm making a choice that's mine." He raised an eyebrow as if he found this sudden assertion of independence laughable. "Making a choice? You're choosing to go against your family. Against me. And for what? To prove a point?" I didn't back down. "No. I'm choosing to take control of my life. And I'm choosing to do it without your conditions, without being silent, without being afraid of what you'll do next." He stepped into the room, his presence closing the distance between us. He was trying to intimidate me, to assert his dominance as he had always done. But I wasn't going to let him. Not anymore. "You think this is about control, don't you?" he said, his voice low, barely a whisper. "It's not. It's about doing what's best for you. And if you think that going against my wishes is going to solve anything, you're wrong." I shook my head, a surge of emotion rising in my chest. "No, Dad. You've never done what was best for me. You've always done what was best for you. You've always used me as a pawn in your little games. And I'm done playing." His expression darkened, but there was a flicker of something I couldn't quite place, in his eyes. It was like a crack in his facade, a momentary vulnerability. But it was fleeting. He quickly regained his composure. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" he said, his voice biting. "You think you're in control now, but you're not. You're making a mistake, Emma. A mistake that will cost you." "Cost me what?" I asked, my voice rising slightly, the anger boiling over. "My dignity? My voice? My ability to make my own decisions? Because if that's the cost, then I'll gladly pay it." For the first time, I saw a flash of something in his eyes, something close to frustration. It wasn't the usual cold indifference. He was losing his grip and I could feel it. The silence between us stretched, thick and suffocating. He was trying to regain control, to force me back into the box he had built for me. But I wasn't going back. "You're not the person I thought you were," he said finally, his voice filled with a mixture of anger and disappointment. "I did everything for you. And now you turn your back on me?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "You didn't do everything for me, Dad. You did everything for yourself. You did everything to keep me under your thumb. I'm done with that. I'm done with you." He stood there, staring at me for a long moment, and I wondered if he was really seeing me for the first time. If he was realizing that I wasn't the same person I had been when I was younger, when I was afraid to speak out, when I allowed him to dictate every part of my life. "Fine," he said, his voice cold once more, his expression hardening. "If that's what you want, then you'll get it. You want to stand up for yourself? Go ahead. But remember, the consequences will be yours to bear." I didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. He had made his choice and I had made mine. He turned and walked toward the door, his footsteps heavy. But before he left, he paused, glancing back at me one last time. "Don't make me regret this," he said, his voice laced with a threat that sent a chill down my spine. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The silence between us was final. The door clicked shut and I was alone again. But this time I wasn't afraid. This time I knew who I was. And I knew what I had to do. The silence that followed my father's departure felt almost suffocating. He had left the room without another word, his cold threat lingering in the air like a shadow I couldn't shake off. I wasn't sure what would happen next. Part of me felt a sense of relief, a weight lifted off my shoulders. But another part of me, one that I couldn't quiet, was terrified of the consequences of my actions. I had made my decision. I wasn't going to be silenced anymore. But what would happen when my father realized I wasn't going to bend to his will? Would he follow through on his threats? Would he make good on his promise to make me regret this? I didn't have the answers, but I couldn't turn back now. The next few days passed in a blur. The hospital room became a kind of prison, the walls closing in on me with each passing hour. I was constantly surrounded by medical staff, preparing me for the surgery. But my mind was elsewhere, racing with questions and fears I couldn't escape. Would the surgery be successful? Or would something go wrong? And then, of course, there was the question of my father. Would he come back and try to make me pay for defying him? Would he pull the surgery altogether, leaving me stuck in limbo, unable to escape the pain and uncertainty that had plagued me for months? It was hard to focus on anything other than the overwhelming sense of dread hanging over me. I wasn't sure if it was the fear of the surgery or the fear of my father's retaliation, but it was consuming me. I had made a stand, but now I had to live with the consequences of my choice. On the day of the surgery, I was prepared. I had spent the morning alone, reflecting on everything that had led me here. I thought about my father, about how he had always tried to control me, about how he had manipulated my every move. But I also thought about myself, about who I was becoming, about the strength I was finally finding within myself. I wasn't the same person who had walked into this hospital a few days ago. I had changed. The doctor arrived shortly before I was scheduled to be taken into surgery. She smiled at me kindly, but I could see the concern in her eyes. She had been the one to explain everything to me, to reassure me that this was a routine procedure, that everything would be fine. But now she seemed hesitant. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" she asked gently, her voice soft but filled with compassion. I nodded, trying to reassure her. "Yes," I said firmly. "I'm ready." She looked at me for a moment longer, as if weighing my words before she nodded. "Okay. We'll take care of you." As I was wheeled into the operating room, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Fear. Hope. Relief. I was about to undergo a procedure that would change my life, physically at least. But emotionally, I felt like I had already made the hardest decision of all. The surgery was just one step. The real battle had been fought in my mind and heart. As I drifted off under the anesthesia, I thought about everything that had happened, about my father's cold threat, about the silence he demanded. And I realized that no matter what happened in the operating room, I had already won. I had taken control of my own life, my own destiny. But the real test would come after the surgery. Would I have the strength to stand by my decision, to hold my ground even when my father came for me again? I woke up in the recovery room with a groggy, disorienting sense of disconnection. The room was dim, the lights low and soft, casting long shadows along the walls. For a moment, I wasn't sure where I was or what had happened. My body felt heavy, as if I had been submerged in water, and the pain I had come to expect was muted, dull, as if it were a distant echo. The last thing I remembered was being wheeled into the operating room, the sterile smell of the environment mixing with the fear and the uncertainty in my chest. I had been so sure of myself when I made the decision to go through with the surgery, to defy my father's orders, but now that it was done, I felt hollow. The soft beep of machines surrounded me, the rhythmic sound grounding me in reality. I tried to move, but my body felt like it had been encased in concrete, heavy and unresponsive. Slowly, my senses started to come back. The sharp, sterile scent of the room, the soft hum of the machines, the dull ache in my abdomen. The pain from the surgery still lingered, but it was nothing compared to the emotional pain I had been carrying for so long. I turned my head slightly, the motion slow and deliberate, and saw a figure standing at the door of the room. My heart skipped a beat. It was my father. I wasn't sure what I expected. Anger? Disappointment? Something else? But what I saw in his eyes was different. Something colder, something calculating. He was standing there, silent, observing me with that same detached look he always wore, like I was just another problem to be solved. The tension that had been hanging between us since the moment I defied him seemed to hang even thicker now, more suffocating. "Dad." My voice came out hoarse and weak, a raw whisper. He stepped into the room slowly, his footsteps measured, deliberate. He didn't rush to my side, didn't show any sign of concern for my well-being. Instead, he stood at the foot of the bed, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes locked on mine. "You look like you're doing well," he said, his voice calm, emotionless. "But I'm sure you already knew that. The surgery went as expected, didn't it?" I nodded slowly, my mind foggy. "Yeah, it went fine. They said everything went as planned." There was a long pause, the silence thick between us. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. It was like we were standing on opposite sides of an invisible chasm, the distance between us stretching further with every passing moment. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, the resentment, the frustration. He was still acting like everything was just business as usual. Like I hadn't just made the most important decision of my life, like I hadn't just shattered the fragile control he tried to maintain over me. "You've made your choice," he said finally, his voice low and controlled. "I just hope you're ready for the consequences." The words stung, but they weren't a surprise. He was a man of few emotions, a man who thought he could control everything, and everyone, around him. But now, in this moment, I realized something. Something I hadn't fully understood before. The consequences weren't just about the surgery. They weren't even about what I had done to defy him. The real consequence was the price of silence, the cost of living in the shadow of someone who always held the power, who always held the keys to my future. I had given up my silence. I had finally chosen to speak for myself, to make my own decisions. But now, it was clear that my father was never going to let me go that easily. "I'm ready," I said, the words surprising me. But they were true. I had finally found the strength to stand up to him, and now I wasn't backing down. His gaze hardened. "You think you're ready? You think that little stunt was going to change anything?" "I think I'm ready to live my life on my terms," I shot back, surprising myself again. My voice, though weak, was firm. The moment hung between us, tense and charged with everything we hadn't said. I could see the storm brewing behind his eyes, the same storm that had haunted our relationship for years. But for the first time, I didn't fear it. I didn't fear him. "You've made your choice, Emma," he said, his tone clipped. "But just remember, you can't take back what you've done." I stared back at him, no longer feeling the same weight of fear that had once followed me every step I took. I had made my choice and I wasn't going to regret it. Not anymore. "I don't want to," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not going to take it back. I'm done being controlled." The air between us was thick with the unspoken truth that we both knew. I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. But this time I didn't want to go back. This time I was the one who held the power, not him. He turned to leave, his back to me now. But before he exited, he paused just for a moment, his hand on the doorframe. "We'll see how long that lasts," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. I watched him leave, the door clicking softly behind him. And for the first time in my life I felt like I had won. Not because I had beaten him, but because I had finally chosen myself. The days after my surgery passed in a haze, a blur of pain and recovery mixed with the quiet whispers of those around me. The nurse would come in, checking on me, adjusting my medication, asking if I was comfortable. My mother would visit, but she didn't say much anymore. She could see the change in me, the resolve that had hardened after my confrontation with my father. But what could she say? She had always been the passive observer, standing by while he controlled everything. Now there was nothing left to do but watch me fight my own battle. But then came the call. It was late in the afternoon, the sun hanging low in the sky, casting a soft orange glow through the hospital window. I had just finished my dinner, a small, tasteless portion of soup, when my phone buzzed on the bedside table. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, and my heart skipped a beat when I saw it. I didn't want to answer it, but something told me that I had to. I picked up the phone and pressed it to my ear, my hand shaking slightly. "Hello? Emma?" The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but there was a sense of urgency to it. "This is Detective Harris from the local police department. I'm calling about a matter regarding your father." My blood ran cold. My father? I could feel the air in the room growing thicker, the familiar dread settling deep in my bones. "What happened?" I managed to choke out. "It's not good, Emma," Harris said, his voice low and cautious. "We need you to come down to the station. There's something we need to discuss." I felt a wave of nausea hit me, the room suddenly spinning as the implications of his words hit home. My mind raced through all the possible scenarios. What had he done? Had he finally gone too far? And what did it have to do with me? I don't understand. What's going on?" My voice was trembling now, the fear creeping into my chest. "We can't go into details over the phone. But it's urgent. Please come down to the station as soon as you can." I hung up without saying another word. The air around me felt like it was closing in, the weight of the call pressing down on me, suffocating me. My father. My mind raced to put the pieces together. What had he done this time? What was I going to walk into at the station? I didn't tell my mother about the call. I couldn't bring myself to. Instead, I slipped out of the hospital room, still in my hospital gown, and made my way to the police station. The hospital staff didn't question me. They were too busy with their own tasks to notice me slip out. The only thing on my mind was the dread that had settled deep inside me. The ride to the station felt like an eternity. My hands were clammy on the steering wheel, my heart pounding in my chest. As I pulled into the parking lot of the station, I saw the flashing lights of a squad car outside, a feeling of finality sweeping over me. This wasn't just some minor situation. Something big had happened. Something that I wasn't ready for. I parked the car and walked into the station, my steps slow, deliberate. The walls inside were cold, the fluorescent lights overhead buzzing softly. The station was quiet, the kind of quiet that made my skin crawl. Detective Harris was waiting for me by the front desk, his expression somber. "Emma," he said, extending his hand, his voice calm but with a trace of tension. "Thanks for coming." I shook his hand stiffly, trying to steady my nerves. "What's going on? What's happened?" He led me down a narrow hallway, the sound of our footsteps echoing in the silence. He didn't speak as we walked, but I could feel the weight of his thoughts pressing down on me, and it made the silence feel unbearable. When we reached a small conference room, he motioned for me to sit at the table. "Your father," he began, his voice steady but carrying the weight of his words. "He's been involved in some serious criminal activity. We've been investigating him for a while now, and we have evidence that links him to a number of illicit activities." My breath caught in my throat. I had always known my father was a man of secrets, but this was beyond anything I could have imagined. "What kind of activity?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Theft, money laundering, embezzlement? But there's more," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "It's a network. A big one. And your father is at the center of it." I was stunned, speechless. The world around me seemed to collapse, the pieces of my life shattering in front of me. My father. The man I had been trying to separate myself from. The man I had spent my entire life seeking approval from. Was this really the same person? "You're saying my father is a criminal?" I asked, disbelief in my voice. "Yes," Harris said firmly. "But here's the thing, Emma. We don't have all the evidence we need to take him down. We need your help." "Help?" The word felt foreign on my lips. "Why would I help you?" "You have a unique position here," Harris said, leaning forward. "You're one of the few people who can get close to him. You've already defied him once. We need you to keep that distance, keep your independence. But we need you to gather information. You're the only person who might be able to get close enough to help us gather the rest of the evidence we need." I felt a chill run through me. The weight of his words settled on my shoulders. What he was asking wasn't something I could take lightly. But I knew there was no turning back. This was it. My father had crossed a line, and now I had to decide whether I was willing to risk everything to expose him, or if I would continue to let him control me. The days following my meeting with Detective Harris were a whirlwind of confusion, fear, and anticipation. I went back to the hospital, but everything felt different now. I was no longer just a patient recovering from surgery. I was a player in a game I didn't choose, a pawn in a dangerous situation that seemed to be spiraling out of control. My father's involvement in criminal activity wasn't just a shock, it was a betrayal that I couldn't comprehend. How could he, the man who had always expected so much from me, be the very person pulling the strings behind something so illegal, so dangerous? All those years I spent trying to please him, to gain his approval, felt like a sick joke now. And worse, he had dragged me into his web whether I wanted it or not. I sat in my hospital room that night, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of the chaos in my mind. Detective Harris had asked me to help him, to gather evidence against my father. But I wasn't sure I could do that. I wasn't sure I could betray my own blood, even after everything that had happened. But there was something else I couldn't ignore. I had spent my entire life being manipulated, controlled. I had lived in the shadows of my father's decisions, always seeking his approval, always trying to please him. And look where that had gotten me. I was now lying in a hospital bed, my life in the hands of a man who didn't care about me, who only saw me as a tool to use for his own gain. Could I really let him get away with it? Could I stand by and allow him to continue ruining lives, including my own? I had already made one choice. I had defied him. I had stood up for myself in a way I had never done before. But now I was being asked to make another choice, a choice that would change everything. The next morning I called Detective Harris. My hands were trembling as I held the phone to my ear. The conversation we had was still fresh in my mind, but now I had to make the decision. "Detective Harris?" I said, my voice tight with emotion. "I've thought about what you said. I'm in." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a slow, almost relieved sigh. "You're sure about this, Emma?" "Yes," I said, my voice growing stronger. "I've spent my entire life under his control. I can't let him keep doing this. Not anymore." "Good. We'll be in touch," Harris said. "And remember, this is dangerous. If you need any help, don't hesitate to reach out." "I will," I said and hung up the phone. And that was it. The choice had been made. I was going to help the police take my father down. I wasn't doing it out of revenge. I wasn't doing it because I hated him. But I couldn't keep living in the shadow of his control, couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. I had to take a stand, not just for myself but for everyone he had hurt along the way. The next few days were a blur of planning and strategizing, but the weight of my decision never left me. I had crossed a line and there was no going back. But it wasn't just about exposing my father anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, about taking back the control that had always been rightfully mine. It wasn't easy. Every interaction with him felt like a battle. I had to play my part, pretend that I was still the obedient daughter, that nothing had changed. But inside, everything had changed. I was no longer the person I had been when I walked into that hospital room. I had found my voice and I wasn't going to be silenced again. Then one day the call came. It was time. Detective Harris and his team were ready to move forward with the investigation. They had gathered enough evidence to make their case, and now it was time to confront my father. I was nervous, terrified even, but I didn't hesitate. This was it. The moment I had been preparing for. I had spent my entire life being afraid of my father, of his power over me, but now I was about to face him and I wasn't backing down. I arrived at his office, my hands cold, my heart racing. As soon as I walked in, I saw him sitting at his desk, his back to me, staring out the window. He didn't turn around when I entered, didn't acknowledge me. He never did. "Dad," I said, my voice steady but filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "We need to talk." He turned slowly in his chair, his expression unreadable, the same cold mask he had worn for years. "What is it, Emma?" he asked, his tone flat. "I know everything," I said, the words hanging heavy in the air. "I know about the money laundering, the embezzlement, all of it." His eyes flickered for just a moment, but then he regained his composure. "I see. I'm not going to help you anymore," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "I'm done being part of your games. And I'm done being silent." He leaned back in his chair, staring at me for a long time. There was no anger in his eyes, no sign of the fury I had expected. Instead, there was something far colder. Disappointment. "You're making a mistake," he said finally. "You always were the weak one. Always too eager to please everyone but yourself." And with that, he stood up, his back straight, his gaze never leaving me. "You'll regret this, Emma. You'll regret turning your back on your own flesh and blood." But I didn't regret it. Not for a second. "I'm not turning my back on anyone," I said, my voice calm and final. "I'm finally standing up for myself." And with that, I turned and walked out of his office. I didn't look back.